Enemy here.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Undercover Vicar's Adventures in Apex Legends, and in this episode we're going to be looking at the question, iron sights or one-time scope. Now I'm one of these players who will instinctively aim down sights whether I need to or not, and I was watching a video by another YouTuber the other day and he mentioned that the one-time scope on the R301 actually gives you less magnification than looking down the iron sights. Now I thought this can't be right, so the only way to find out whether this is right or not is to head into the firing range and have a little look. So the plan is pretty straightforward. I've headed into the firing range with Bloodhound as my legend of choice, and I'm going to grab hold of two R301s. I'm going to put a one-time scope onto one of them, keep the other one on iron sights, and then see if there is a difference when looking down the sights as to the magnification between the one-times and the iron sights. And in the interests of research, I'm going to make sure that the Hollow and the Classic are showing the same level of magnification. So I'm going to have an R301 with a Hollow on it, R301 with a Classic, and make sure they're both seeing the same, so that both one-times are showing the same level of magnification. The method for this is to line up on the center of one of the targets and then flip between the two weapons. And as you can see here, going through the R301, the Hollow and the Classic are both showing the same level of magnification, so it's goodbye Hollow. So now that we have ditched the Hollow, we're looking through iron sights on one of our R301s, and then while still aiming down sights, we're flipping between the two, and you can clearly see in this case, yes, there is a difference in the zoom level between the iron sights and the one-time scope. So the R301 with the one-time scope on it actually has less zoom than the R301 when looking down the iron sights. And this got me thinking, maybe it applies to other weapons as well, because a one-time scope should show you the same as iron sights. That's why it's a one-time scope. So I decided to grab a hold of some more light weapons and have a look. So I grabbed hold of a pair of RE45s, one with the iron sights and one with the one-times, and flipped between the two whilst aiming down sights, and you can see it's a different effect here. The one-time scope actually gives more magnification than the iron sights. Iron sights and one-times should show the same thing, but in the case of the RE45, they certainly don't. But what about the ever-dependable P2020? So we grabbed hold of one each of those, took them down to the targets, one on iron sights, one on the one-times, repeated the experiment, and this time the findings were it was exactly the same. The view was the same. The one-times did the job. You saw exactly the same through iron sights as you did on the one-times. Next up was the R99, everyone's favourite spray and pray weapon, and so we did the same thing, one with iron sights, one with a one-time scope, and you can see here it gives exactly the same. So same result as the P2020. What you see down the iron sights and what you see down the one-time scope are exactly the same. Next up for the light ammo weapons, it's the G7 Scout, a marksman weapon, and you can see here iron sights zoomed in, one-time scope not as zoomed in. So we have a similar thing to the R301. Looking through the iron sights gives you more zoom than looking through a one-time scope when you're using the G7 Scout. And last up for the light ammo weapons, it's the Alternator. And with this one, the one-times does what we need it to do, gives you the same view as the iron sights. So, in terms of the light ammo weapons, the R301 does indeed have a difference, as does the RE45 in the opposite direction. But what about the other weapons in the game? Let's go over and take a quick look at the sniper category. Now these are weapons that you wouldn't normally use a one-time scope on. You'd normally use something a little bit more substantial, 2 to 4 or even a 4 to 8, or if you get really lucky, the golden 10 scope. But when I'm using these, no matter what scope I've got on, I can't hit a barn door at 10 paces. So if I have a look here at the iron sights and the one-times on the Sentinel, there is actually quite a difference. Similar to the R301, when you're using iron sights, there is more of a zoom in than when you're using the one-time scope on this particular weapon. Next up is the charge rifle. Now this is definitely a weapon I use from a greater distance than is currently being displayed here. I like to be halfway across the map when I'm going to get my 3 points of poke damage. But as you can see here, the iron sights are giving us the same effect as with the Sentinel. You get more zoom in on iron sights than you do when you're using the one-time scope. Of the current crop of sniper rifles on offer, this is undoubtedly my favourite, the Longbow. But as you can see here, the one-time scope gives us less of a zoom than the iron sights. So it would seem that the R301's situation with the one-time scope is also prevalent throughout the sniper weapons. The Sentinel, the charge rifle and the Longbow all better with iron sights. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at the heavy ammo classification, and we're going to be starting our heavy ammo tour with the Flatline. And with this being an assault rifle, I wonder if it has a similar effect to the R301, its category buddy, and it would appear that yes it does. Looking down the one-time scope, then looking down the iron sights, we get more of a zoom from the iron sights than we do with the one-time scope. If you're not sure of what we're looking at, then have a look at the position of the training dummy on the right hand side, and you can see that they are closer when looking down the iron sights. Next up, we're looking at the Hemlock, another of the assault rifle classification, and sure enough, I'm starting to see a pattern here. We have the same effect. Looking down the iron sights brings the training dummy closer to the firing position. So the one-time scope gives you less magnification than the iron sights with the Hemlock. Next up in our heavy ammo tour, we're going to have a look at the Prowler, a submachine gun, different category to the Flatline and the Hemlock, and you can see this SMG when we're looking down the iron sights and looking down the one-times, it is giving us exactly the same field of view. So when we're using a Prowler, a submachine gun, the iron sights and the one-time scope are exactly the same. Next up in the heavy ammo category is the Wingman, the pistol entry in the heavy ammo club, and you can see, looking down the iron sights and looking down the one-time scope, that the view here is the same. So it's very much like the P2020 in this respect, another pistol that has no change when looking down the iron sights and looking down the one-time scope. Next up from the heavy ammo squad is the 30-30 repeater, the marksman weapon, and this one does have a notable difference between the iron sights and the one-time scope. Looking down the one-time scope, you see further away than the iron sights. Iron sights has better magnification on this marksman weapon. Still with the heavy ammo, but heading into the light machine gun category, and we're looking at the latest light machine gun arrival, the Rampage. This one does a lot of heavy duty damage, but with a slow fire rate. But as you can see here, looking down the one-time scope and looking down the iron sights, we have another difference of view. The iron sights giving you a greater magnification than the one-time scope. Apex's first multi-ammunition weapon, the Car SMG. It can take heavy or it can take light ammo. We're testing it here in heavy, but the results are the same for both. Looking down the iron sights, looking down the one-times gives exactly the same view. So on the Car SMG, the one-time scope does exactly what you'd expect and give the same view as the iron sights. Rounding out our heavy ammunition weapons is another LMG, another light machine gun, the Spitfire. And as you can see here, looking down the iron sights, looking down the one-times, we are getting a greater degree of magnification from the iron sights than we're doing from the one-times. Very similar to the Rampage, another of the LMG category. So we're going to move now into the energy category and see if we get similar results. Now, personally speaking, I'm not a massive fan of the energy weapons, with the exception of the triple take, but I learned how to use that when it was a sniper. So, first up we have the L-Star, very much a close quarters spray and pray kind of weapon, but it is an LMG, so looking down the one-time scope, looking down the iron sights is giving us a greater degree of magnification, but because it's a close-up weapon, then maybe the one-time scope might not be such a bad idea. But, like the other LMGs, iron sights gives greater magnification on the L-Star. Moving on to the Havoc, another one of my least favourite weapons because I never learnt to handle the recoil on this. I'm sure it's a lovely weapon, I'm just rubbish with it. And looking down the iron sights, looking down the one-times, this is an assault rifle, so we are seeing that magnification from the iron sights. Very similar to the R301 and the Hemlock and the Flatline, this is an assault rifle where the one-time scope gives you less magnification than the iron sights. Next up, it's the Devotion, another one of our LMG classification, one of the big heavy weapons, slow to get going unless you've got a turbocharger on it, but again, like its LMG fellows, you can see there is a difference between the iron sights and the one-times. Iron sights giving you a greater degree of magnification on the Devotion. Next up, the triple take, and I'm aware that it's back where it began as an energy weapon, but when I first met it, it was a sniper weapon and it was using sniper ammo. Now it's a marksman weapon, but it's still in the energy category. But with it being a marksman, it does indeed have a different behavior for the one-time scope and the iron sights. Iron sights again being an improvement for the triple take rather than using the one-time scope. And we're back in the SMG category for our final energy weapon, the Volt. And you can see here, looking down the iron sights and then looking down the one-time scope is giving us exactly the same field of view, again, as you'd expect from an SMG and as you would expect from a one-time scope. The only weapon in the game that currently takes arrows is the Bocek Bow, and this is a marksman category weapon. And as you can see, looking down the iron sights and looking down the one-times here, like other marksman weapons, the iron sights is giving you a greater degree of magnification than the one-times. It's difficult to see with the glove being in the way for the one-times, but the iron sights are bringing everything that little bit closer. Moving on to shotguns now, and shotguns are traditionally something that you will use in close range, so a one-time scope could be pretty useful. Starting off here with the Mastiff, and as you can see, there is no difference in your field of view between the one-times and the iron sights. So with our first shotgun, the Mastiff, the one-time scope is doing what it should do, giving you the same view as looking down the iron sight. Next up in our journey through the shotguns is the EVA 8, the ever dependable EVA 8. And like its friend the Mastiff, there is no difference when looking down the iron sights to looking down the one-time scope. But what about the beast of the shotguns, the Peacekeeper? Landing the most damage for a close range hit, but also the most difficult to use because of its slow reload speed in between shots. So, looking down the scopes there, it's the same as the other shotguns so far. The iron sights and the one-time scope giving exactly the same field of view. And rounding out the shotguns is everyone's favourite shotgun pistol, the Mozambique. And like the other shotguns in the category, it has the same effect. Iron sights and one-time scope showing exactly the same level of magnification. So, shotguns unaffected by the one-time scope, it does exactly what you'd expect it to do. So it looks like the rumours are indeed true. The R301 does have a greater zoom on the iron sights, as do quite a few of the weapons. But if we look at them not in their ammo category, but instead by their categorization, it makes a little bit more sense. The assault rifles, snipers, LMGs and marksmen all affected by this greater zoom on iron sights, but the submachine guns, the shotguns and the pistols unaffected, with the exception of the RE45, which seems to have greater magnification. Anyway, that's it for this video. If you liked the video, click the like button. If you disliked it, click the dislike button. And if you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe. Undercover Vicar, over and out.